Hi, I'm Leah and this is FilterFree Photography. Today we're going to be looking at the Helios 44-2, a cult classic for the M42 mount. So today I'm looking at the Helios 44-2, which is a 58mm f2 lens. You might find some similarities with this lens to an earlier lens that I've already covered, the Jupiter 9. They're both Russian lenses, both copies of Zeiss manufacturing designs, and they both have cult followings, but for very different reasons. So the Jupiter 9, if you go back to that video that I made about it, it's popular partly just because it has a portrait length of 85mm and is very cheap for that kind of lens. This is not a portrait length lens, it's a normal length lens, so 58mm, a little bit tighter than normal, but it's managed to get probably more of a following than any old Russian lens or maybe even any other M42 lens despite that. So if you're unaware, there are probably 1,000 50mm vintage lenses, and all of them are pretty good. There were a lot of winning formulas for 50mm length lenses back in the day, and so it's the easiest to pick up when you're looking for a vintage lens. And with a couple exceptions, you're not really going to be disappointed. And so when you're approaching the Helios and you're seeing all these people talking about it, you might ask, well, what makes this 50mm length lens any better than all these other ones that you've seen? So the thing that makes a Helios lens special is that it's very cheap, first of all, but it also has a very unique look to how it renders images. And the way that that look is that it looks swirly. So if you've ever seen Lens Baby and their twist lenses where the background has kind of twisted into a circle, this gives that effect, probably without the meaning to have done it, but it does it pretty strongly, and a lot of people really like how that can give you a unique type of image. So before I go any farther, let me tell you just a little bit about this lens. As I said, it is of Russian make. It is a copy of a Zeiss lens, just like the Jupiter 9 is. It has 8 blades inside, and like the Jupiter 9, it has a preset aperture design, which means that it is clickless. So if you're not used to that, that can take some getting used to. And it can also be very difficult to remember what aperture you used when you take the photos. The way that the preset aperture works is that you set the aperture manually ahead of time, and then it will only close down to what you've set it to. So if you set it to 8, you can get anything below 8, but you can't go past 8. The Helios is so popular and so cheap that many online sellers in Eastern Europe and in Russia have taken to selling them, and you can also get them completely refurbished for pretty cheap. So this one sold for the same price as any other Helios, maybe 50 bucks, and it was completely redone, and it's smooth and perfect. It's like the day that it was made. There are many versions of this lens. You can probably find a dozen if you just look across eBay. This one has some kind of zebra striping to it. I don't really know what's up with that, but they're all the same optical design. So no matter what you buy, it's going to have the same kind of look to it. You'll see that, as expected for a normal length lens, it's quite small. This is it next to the A7 II, although it does get bigger if you have to add the M42 mount to it. So other than that, it was easy to focus and easy to change the aperture, and I had no problems with it just from a standpoint of construction. So without further ado, I'm going to show you some pictures that I took with this lens on a walk with my friend, trying to get that swirly bokeh, but also testing the other merits and possible problems that this lens could have. And then we'll talk a little bit more about what this lens can do. Welcome back. And so right away, what you can see with this lens is that you definitely need a hood for it. Like many vintage lenses, the coatings aren't very good on it. I'm not even sure there is a coating on it aside from dust from sitting on my table. So as soon as you shoot anywhere close to a light source like the sun, contrast goes down greatly, and that can be a really big problem if you like to post-process your images. There can be a kind of artistic look to it, but probably you want a lens hood just to cut out the glare. I'll show you a difference here. This is with a lens hood off, and this is with a makeshift lens hood, and you can see just how much the contrast goes up right here. Next, along with the low contrast, if you're shooting into the sun or really in daylight at all without a lens hood, you can also sometimes get a kind of funky looking flare from this. At least my copy of the Helios, it isn't even black against the inside edges of the lens, so there is a lot of reflection going on inside, and without the lens hood and shooting in that low contrast area, I could get this sharp red circle design, and it was kind of cool if I wanted that for an artistic effect, but that's not something that you always want to find in a lens. One thing that really surprised me about the Helios that people hadn't talked that much about was that it was really sharp. I mean, I had heard people say for a vintage lens, this is a very sharp lens. You don't really get a sense of that until you start using it. I've used a lot of vintage lenses, and this one was particularly sharp. Let me show you some 100% close-ups just to show you that. So not only can you see that there's a heavy swirl to some of these images in the way that Lens Baby tries to replicate, you can also see that it seems to be partly because of an extreme cat eye effect that happens towards the corners as well. Most lenses will give you some cat eye towards the corners just because as you look through a lens from different angles, you'll see that the circle, the circular image that's coming into the lens actually starts to become a cat eye. But it happens a lot more obviously with this lens. So if I put lights into one of the corners or all of the corners, you'll see that the cat eyeing happens very, very quickly, very, very obviously. If you're a fan of this swirly look, that's great. It does manage to get that. It's not super strong. There is an 85mm version of the Helios that I think captures it a lot stronger, but it is $450 more. So it's not a small investment just for that swirling effect. One thing I noticed when I was looking at photos taken with this lens on Flickr and in other places is that although people talked about the swirling bokeh all the time, it seemed like mostly people were just taking pictures of flowers. It was like a flower taking lens, and I wasn't really sure why that was happening. But now that I've used it for a bit, I've discovered that it has a hidden talent that is not mentioned nearly as much because it's overshadowed by the swirling bokeh. And what that is that it has a really close focus. And so that swirling bokeh happens only at a certain distance from your subject, where the subject has to be the right kind of distance from the background and the right kind of distance from you. But actually you can get a lot closer to the person than is really necessary or wanted for a 50mm lens and still focus. And what that means is that although that doesn't really help you for portraiture, it does let you get a lot closer to flowers and small animals. And once you get that close to them, it works almost as like a semi-macro lens. And you get this beautiful, beautiful bokeh because you're focusing so close. And you'll see with the cat photos that I've taken that there's some really, really wonderful, smooth transitional bokeh in the background that you can't really get with a human face because the kitty's face is so little that you can close focus in a way that you can't with a human face and without it overwhelming the frame. And then the transitional bokeh behind the cat's face is really, really soft and really, really blurred nicely. And so in conclusion, as a person lens, this is okay. If you want that swirly bokeh effect, you can try and get it. You'll get kind of a different look to it, and you might use it occasionally. But as a flower lens or as a cat lens especially, this is really a wonderful piece of hardware. I think that I would keep this just to take pictures of cats, honestly, if that's your kind of thing. Anything that's going to be smaller than a human face where you can get really, really up close to it, the Helios works surprisingly well. Like I said, it's almost as if it's like a half macro lens. So if you liked this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you have any comments or thoughts about the Helios or any other vintage Russian lenses like this, please, of course, don't hesitate to leave a comment below. You could also suggest lenses for me to review in the future. And thanks for watching.